back then, it was just 15 people. And he then started the customer retention team, which involved into Salesforce customer success organization. He spent 3 years running App Exchange partner success team, onboarding the first 500 ISV partners. Robert's next stop was the foundation, where he spent 4 years selling to a higher education customers as a field account executive. Today, he's responsible for the enablement of the platform sales team and a frequent speaker at Bootcamp, as well as Silicon Valley Innovation Center. So our second speaker is John Parello. John is the principal engineer and corporate strategic innovation group at Cisco. John is leading the development of new products in network, telephony, wireless, energy, and lighting management at Cisco. He currently oversees the engineering of Cisco worldwide portfolio of innovation projects and is experienced in creating cutting-edge technology, lead it to market, and present it publicly with success. So John, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure to see both of you.
Thanks.
So, all of our participants, I know they will be a little bit shy in the beginning. So let me probably start the conversation, and then please, everyone, please feel free to type your questions in chat or just raise your hand, and then you can unmute, and we can continue the conversation. So Rob, since I introduced you first, I'm going to address the first question to John. So John, I know from your presentation and from your experience that you are leading a lot of this a lot of those innovation projects, and you're also leading a lot of M&A activities, and you're also leading a lot of trying to keep Cisco as innovative as possible, right? And in that front, when you're trying to build this culture of innovation, when you're trying to build this framework for the innovation, how do you handle the people who resist the innovation? What is sort of like your silver bullet to convince people who are very comfortable with their current status quo? How do you address that?
That's interesting, because I think for us, the culture is the most important part about trying to keep innovation at a big company, right? The culture is what matters. So we've had success running a program called our Innovate Everywhere Challenge, where it looks like Kickstarter internally in the company, and people submit ideas, and the ideas have been everything from like new ways of sharing information or new network technologies down to like putting sensors in a pool that Cisco might never even do, but we put them in there. And us around people who might be resistant is we've added something onto that.
Is it just me, John, or we're losing you for a second?
I lost him too.
Yeah, I could not hear.
Yeah, we can't hear him.
Yeah, John, we lost you for a second.
Yeah.
No, we cannot hear you. No.
No.
Say something. No. Okay. Yeah, I think he's just saying that he's going to reconnect.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's happening. And I know that John will say something that, it never happens on the WebEx. Because he's on Cisco, but yeah, I see that John is
coming.
Yeah. So Rob, maybe in the meantime, sort of like, and we'll get back to John in a second. Is that Rob? When sort of like Salesforce is going between trying to do something internally and sort of like build this innovation ecosystem through M&A and external partners, how do you decide what are you going to do in-house and what you can do with the external resources, either buying or external partnerships or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, well, first of all, thanks for having me on today. Nice to see everybody. Hope you're all well. I think it's just a kind of a decision on a point-by-point basis. So, we are constantly looking at the total addressable market for our services and the innovations that are being requested by our customers. It's funny. A lot of people think that, people always ask, like, what is the 3 and 5 year plan for Salesforce? My short answer to that question is, I don't know, because my customers haven't told me what it is yet. And so much of what we do is in response to, the market in general, as well as the opportunities or the challenges that are facing our customers. And so we're basically generally looking for the fastest path of least resistance, I would say. So our acquisition of folks like MuleSoft, of Tableau, the sort of the multi-billion-dollar acquisitions that we've made, have been a kind of a combination of a better way to approach a total addressable market and the necessary speed to get there. One of the interesting things about Salesforce is that I don't really think that we're the innovators. We get this award for being like the world's most innovative company, us and Tesla and other folks. And it's not really true. That the real innovators are the customers and the partners that build and deliver value on our platform. So it's sort of an interesting concept because we have some products, clouds that we call them, that we talk about. But really the true innovation happens when people take these sets of tools that we have given them, and they're the ones that reinvent their business. They're the ones that make a shift to digital. They're the ones that build new channels and new ways of connecting with and putting the customer at the center of their business. So in a lot of ways, it's funny because I think of us as a set of tools, and then we also have an added responsibility to inspire our customers to do something with them. So that's sort of how I look at it. I don't know if that answered. I think that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. And I actually, I do have a follow-up question, but I just want to get back to John. So John, how do you actually work with those people who don't want to innovate, or who don't want to, again, like, I don't like the word innovate because again, it's sort of like means nothing, but like those people who don't want to onboard new things, those people who don't want to play along. We cannot hear you. No, we can't. No. Maybe.
So I'm fine now. Yeah, no, I'm fine now. Yeah, I'm fine now. It's weird. It was cutting in and out. Yeah, I can't blame my network connection. That's for sure. So. Okay. Repeat the question, and then
yes. So how do you actually like address people in your ecosystem, in your innovation, that don't want to play along, that don't want to play with the new initiatives, who are comfortable with the status quo?
Yeah, I don't know how much of the great answer that I gave on mute was, but basically what we do is we run an internal contest, right? And we have this, it looks like Kickstarter internally, and people compete, and the award is quite high. It's like a $50,000 award for any idea that goes through. And the way we get people that are usually it's people later in career that sometimes we're just like, I don't want to submit my idea to be judged. I've been doing this for quite some time and stuff. So we've changed it around, and we have the ability now for people to become mentors of a project, right? Where you could see, we were talking about just recently about being an advisor, right? That's exactly what they do. You go on and you could become the advisor to a project, and then people they sort of get the kind of training that they need if they haven't had it before, or they get that kind of visceral experience of like, I didn't do it, but I mentored them, so I still feel engaged in it. So it's that advisory board that you were talking about. We do that internally. We allow people to have a different role on the innovations, and that helps build the culture of innovation internally. People talk about big companies. Big companies aren't aircraft carriers that are guided by one person. They're really a whole lot of boats tied together, and you got to get them all going in the right direction. It's very rare that you have a company that's driven like an aircraft carrier. So to get those people to go around, we need that culture of innovation. You have to have the same sort of culture for the different captains on all the different little boats.
So let's say, to take your example, right, is that you have all of those little boats, right, and you have teams on each of those boats, right, working together. So how do you actually encourage the managers of those teams, the captains of the small boats, to sort of share almost their people budget, their time budget on those innovation projects that are sort of benefiting the company in the whole, but might not be benefiting that particular executive or that particular manager?
We roll up reports and statistics up to the highest level VPs, and it becomes a badge of honor then, because if this goes over, we get people from VC firms to come in and judge. Our CEO comes in and judges sometimes when we get him on the schedule and stuff. So it becomes a badge of honor to have one of your projects move up. And we toyed with rewarding the manager as well and saying, oh, you were the manager, we'll give you some of that. And we've never had to, because it became a badge of honor to have people work and get those projects going in. So you started to see like people competing. Well, I've had this many projects submitted. And we also have a sort of a stopgap in in this contest. We don't really have a winner. We pick we pick 3 that we will fund and move forward. But anyone that didn't make it, that didn't get forward in there, any VP is allowed to then back it. And we still get a lot of that where people are like, you didn't make it? It's a great idea. I'll back it anyway. You know, so you get that engagement, and everybody knows from, like, you know, America's Got Talent or any of those shows that, like, sometimes the 4th place winner is the one that's famous and the first 3 don't go through. So you got to have that little stopgap in there, and that's how we do it.
So what about that? And then again, John, just probably off to you, is that how do you address the risk of blame culture that can result from a failure, which then dampens enthusiasm towards the change?
So failure is for me, when we're judging innovations, there's volume and value that you have to track, right? And a lot of people just track the value. It didn't make it, and this project didn't make it, so therefore you assign blame on it. But then for us, it's like the ones that we divest from quickly. If we divest it from it quickly, we have a lot of volume that we're going through. 1 in 10 ideas is a good one, and then out of those, another 1 in 10 is going to make it, right? So that means you got to be really good at getting rid of 9 all the time. You got to be getting rid of all the ones that you don't want to do. So it's not saying it's not a bad idea. Sometimes it's just not for you, right? It's not for your company. So you say, okay, I divest that. So if you get to the point where you're encouraging volume, and then you're going to get the value out of it. It's almost like hit rates on a website, right? Like you're going to say, look, 1 in X number of clicks is going to be a turnover or something like that. Well, 1 in 10 projects is going to be good. I got to have a pipeline of volume. And once people get used to that, then they're like, okay, it's adding to the volume, you know, and that's the way to change the culture.
Yeah, and I also think if I can add on that, is that as you divest from it, right, you're still trying to keep sort of like the residual value. Maybe you're trying some new technology, right? That people at least learn that new technology and they implement it maybe in some other project, right? So I always believe that every kind of innovation does have the salvage value, and people need to look into the salvage value and see what it is. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. So Rob, maybe off to you in terms of the customers and then that failure, right? So let's say that I sometimes, you know, I face the customers that don't really know what they want, right? They come in and they say, hey, we want to be innovative, right? Or we want to do something that they don't know even yet. So how do you handle this ambiguity? How do you handle this almost sometimes even failure, maybe down the line, where customers thought that they're going to achieve something with your tools and they fail to achieve that? How do you handle that part? Rob,
I don't know that we have any unsuccessful customers.
But maybe some unsuccessful initiatives on the customer side, right?
So a couple of things. I want to build on what John was saying because I think it's super relevant. You know, when I think about innovation, I think there's basically 2 types. There is, in my world, there's customer-centric innovation, and then there's ego-centric innovation. Okay. And a good idea that does not have an addressable market is kind of useless in my world. And so a lot of what we do is like when we go through, we do a lot of what we call sort of sprints, hackathons, if you will, on our technical organization. And sort of you know, when you present a new idea to someone like Parker Harris, who's our co-founder and CTO, his first question out of his mouth is basically, who's going to care? Like, how is this actually going to benefit our audience of stakeholders, whether it's a partner or a customer or an employee? And, you know, innovation without an audience is interesting, but isn't necessarily relevant. So I think we put that filter on a lot of stuff that we do. One of the challenges that I find with innovation is I get a lot of audience these days with chief digital officers or chief officer of digital transformation or transformational digital leadership council manager, like all these titles I've never really heard of until the last 5-6 years.
Chief buzzword officer.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting, I really shouldn't make too much of that being a chief evangelist because that title didn't exist either like 5 years ago. Anyway, but what's fascinating to me is the lack of definition of a win or success. And so when we have these digital people who say we want to digitally transform, my first question is why? Well, because digital transformation is important. Got it. Why? Well, because everybody's doing it. I'm like, great, but why are you doing it? What is the so many times I'll get a presentation on a company's digital transformation strategy, and the one thing that's missing is metrics. Like, what dial is this going to move? What is the business outcome? And so for those of you that are investing or investing your time in developing digital transformation strategies or innovation strategies, understand that you're still running a business. And unless your efforts are tied to a tangible business result, number one, you're not likely to get funded to do it. And you're basically sort of building a disconnect between the business that's running and this innovation skunkworks. So like a lot of the innovation teams at companies are considered like the enemy because they're perceived as just trying to derail what the company's been doing for 100 years, as opposed to aligning to what the company is trying to do for the next 10 years. Yeah. And so I think a lot of it is around building a consensus. The innovation, like in a vacuum, doesn't really provide value to a business, but when it's tied to the strategic goals or the KPIs or the 5 things that an organization is looking to accomplish over the next few years, then it becomes really relevant and much more powerful in my experience. Yeah,
I definitely think that I said earlier in the beginning of the conversation that like no one needs innovation, right? And no one needs the innovation by itself, right? Somebody needs improvement in the processes, someone needs the improvement in their customer acquisition, but no one needs innovation in general. And I think that they have several comments, and I'm going to go through them. But I think in terms of what Matthew was saying in our session 1 is that sometimes, when you start this innovation, sometimes what it's going to affect, but you might not have the metrics in the very beginning. So sometimes you might need to wait a little bit. You understand that this probably going to affect your customers, but maybe you need to wait a little bit to collect some metrics and then go full speed. Do you agree with that approach, that you need to test it first a little bit, then try to realize what is happening, and then go the full speed if you're not exactly sure what it's going to do?
We have sort of an MVP philosophy, and it's not most valuable anything. It's minimally viable product. And so I think that you see a lot of companies with very, very grand plans, a great strategy, but they're weak on tactics. And so they haven't really thought about, a trial balloon or a first step. And so, when you're in our world, we do 3 big releases a year as a company, right? We push out all this innovation to our customers. Very rarely, or I would say almost never, is a product, I don't want to say fully baked, but it's always an opportunity for us to get feedback from our stakeholders and understand how we can be more valuable. So incremental innovation, small steps towards a larger goal, I think allows you not only to build immediate credibility with your stakeholders, but also the ability to adjust course as necessary as you go through. So instead of sort of doing a big bang, giant launch, a lot of little tiny bangs, a lot of incremental efforts that immediately show value, because people are very impatient. And digital transformations tend to be like multi-year, decade-long events. But being able to show early value, say maybe just in a sales cycle process, or just in a customer support process, or just thinking about where you can add immediate value, oftentimes will drive long-term momentum and makes it a lot easier to accomplish your longer-term goals.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely agree with that. And that's kind of sort of this agile mentality, right? Is that you understand that, yes, we're doing it because we think that this is going to happen. We're not exactly sure. We're willing to test it because we think it has a lot of potential, but we're sort of okay with that uncertainty. And that's why we're doing this MVP, to get a little bit more certain about those uncertainties, right? So I think
testing it is the minimal viable product is absolutely the way to go. You have to get something up and running as fast as possible. And for us, the same thing that Robert was saying is to find a customer. One is, why should we care about doing this? And then for us, if we're doing it with a customer, why does the customer care? And the best way to find out if a customer cares is to show them what you're doing and say, would you be willing to help us co-design this thing? Maybe you get, you'll get first mover momentum on this something or something like that. And if they say yes, then it's validated. But they go, I don't care, and I don't want to. It pretty much, if they won't engage with you, you got your answer.
And I also want to add on it that I think actually shown something that you're working on again, and just got sort of like getting a little bit of resources to show the actual product. I cannot tell you how many times we had in the situation where where we say something, we're going to do this, and everyone's like, yeah, this is like the best thing ever since the sliced bread. And then we show them the actual thing, like, this isn't exactly not what we want, right? So I think actually showing something in front, I think is really important to get this mass scale innovation. But again, those companies have to be a little bit confident and be sort of comfortable with this a little bit uncertainty before you should actually deliver maybe like a small product that is coming in. So we have several questions coming in, and I just let you take one of them. So maybe John, to you, how do you leverage processes in order to generate employee engagement?
That comes down to culture. So employee engagement, again, I mean, that contest is a big one that we did. And that, it's funny, I always talk about that one, and it's training. It's getting people trained in how to build an MVP, how to do the process of innovation, get the training that they need. And the best way we saw that was through that contest that we run internally. Like we must have had something like 3,000 ideas come through the pike, and maybe 8 of them have gone on to do something, and now about, I think, 4 of them have gone on to profitability. I mean, you think about it, 3,000 came in, 4 went out, right? But what we wind up doing then is there's a bunch of people. When you get further along, we take about the top 20 projects in any cohort that's coming through, and we send them to training, how to do a pitch, how to do the minimal viable product, all these kind of things that they're doing. And when they do that training, we've won, right? Like whether or not the ideas go through, we don't care at that point. I mean, we do care, but I mean, my team is like, hey, look at the people. We're training 200-300 people a year in how to be innovative. So when I get something that came from the field and came from the customers, I know these people are trained in what they've got. And the ideas that come out of it are the benefits. So having people who can get up and be resilient and keep innovating is really important. And that culture is what's going to be important for us, especially in a big organization.
Yeah, and I also think that once they could kind of have their own skin in the game, right? That they created the project and all this,
Exactly.
They'll be much more engaged in those trainings. They'll be much more engaged into those
exactly
things that
yeah.
rather.
Yeah, you're not doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not doing the lemonade stand. And that's the one I talked about, like, somebody made a sensor for their pool. When somebody falls in the pool, Cisco's not going to do it. It doesn't answer the question why. Why should we care? We're not going to sell sensors in pools. But the person who was doing that was really engaged and went through the whole process and learned on something that was very important with them. So that helped.
Yeah. So Rob, maybe this question direct to you and maybe a little bit to your early days in the Salesforce is that how do you create momentum when your company is in the early stages of cultural and mindset shift?
Brute force. No,
you just start hitting people.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that first off, I think it needs to be a top-down approach, right? So our CEO has been very clear about concepts about the beginner's mind, and that no idea is a bad idea. The worst idea is one that he doesn't hear. And creating a safe space to be disruptive, a safe space to fail, for lack of a better word, and really to challenge the status quo. People always ask, what are you worried about, or what do you think the big threats to Salesforce? I always say complacency. I think that one of the things that we have really adopted culturally as an organization is that the status quo is the enemy. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to a company is success, because success, builds a mindset. We're doing things the right way. We're clearly winning, right? We're sending out tons and tons of DVDs and little red envelopes and making lots of money doing that. Why would we ever want to do anything different? Could have been a Netflix approach. It could have, very easily. The difference
it was a Blockbuster approach.
The difference between Blockbuster and Netflix is actually very small. And they were both there at the same time with the same opportunity. And one decided that based on some minimally viable products, based on their early returns for a digital or a on-demand subscription business, Netflix made the call very early on to completely abandon, let the envelope business die and focus in on a new way of working. And that was a really, really compelling and an aggressive move that they made. But a lot of that comes from a top-down leadership. So that's the first thing that I would say, is that it needs to be a C-level initiative to create that culture. And culture is not built overnight. It is something that takes time to build, and it requires a bit of humility that I think a lot of leaders is not necessarily their strong point. What I mean by that is when, I tell you that what you've been doing for the last 10 years is wrong, or I challenge the status quo, a lot of people have challenges with that. It is a big shift, and it takes time, but a top-down leadership approach, I think, is the one thing that's helped us from the very, very beginning, if that's helpful.
Yeah, and actually a couple thoughts here that I always say that, like, status quo is dead, right? Is that, like, if you keep doing the same thing you're doing, there's going to be someone else who's going to find how to do it better, and they're just going to chop off your market really quickly.
Yeah, well, one piece of advice I always give, so I do speak a lot to our new hires, and I give the same piece of advice to all of them, which was the piece of advice was given to me by our CEO when I was hired, because he said, take 6 months to figure out what we do, and then tell us what we should do. But don't come in here and tell us what we should do on day one. You need to build a bit of street cred, and a build of you do a little, like my wife likes to say, and I know it's been in a book as well, that seek to understand before you seek to be understood. So I think it's really easy to come across as being a disruptive innovator, and be called a lot of things that are a lot worse than that. If you don't take the time to understand the culture, if you don't understand some of the history or why things are the way they are, you can kind of become irrelevant if you're not educated. And so it's just a piece of advice to take a few minutes to understand why things are the way they are before you come in all hot and heavy to change everything.
Yeah, John, what? Please. John, go ahead. Did you drop? Oh, yeah, you're still connecting to audio. That's fine. Well, I'll give you a second. So Rob, on that front, right, is that, and I do actually agree, but sometimes it becomes a little bit interesting. In one of my former employees, they got a person who was supposed to be chief innovation officer, the person who worked in another bank in another very legacy organization for like 30 years. And like, yes, maybe not, but no, here's actually a really interesting question. So how to manage the resistance to change when it comes from the organization first line of leadership, when the person who resists has the decision-making power to slow down or inhibit change? How do you handle this, Rob? You're on mute.
I spend most of my time on the phone with customers, right? And we're always pitching change. We're always, talking about bots and AI and digital transformation, omni-channel experiences, shared services platform, blah, 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 all these things that we talk about. But kind of going back to my earlier point about digital transformation, it's about aligning to the goals of your audience. So if I'm having a challenge connecting to the senior leadership of an organization, it's mostly because I'm talking about what's important to me, not what's important to them. And so asking those questions, such as, how do you find success for the organization over the next 12 to 18 months, right? And what can I do to help? Versus, let me tell you all the reasons why this organization is going to be unsuccessful over the next 12 to 18 months unless you listen to me, right? Those are two very different conversations. One builds consensus and momentum and alignment with executive leadership. The other one sets you up as a pariah and pushes you off to the side because I don't have time for that nonsense. I don't understand how that digital transformation strategy is actually going to impact my business. And people get excited about digital transformation. It's cool. A lot of buzz. You get buzzwords by the truckload these days of things you can talk about. But until they are actually aligned to the goals of the business, it's just going to be noise. This is kind of how I think about it. Yeah, so that's where I spend most of my time, is helping our account teams stop talking and start listening. right? I have a lot of account teams. One of the things I do when I start off every meeting, when we have them, is I ask the C-level, from the customer side to do me a favor. And hey, John, as the CEO, would you do me a favor and write down your top 5 business objectives for the next 12 to 15 months or 12 to 18 months? And hey, account team, at the same time, would you do me a favor and write down John's top 5 business objectives for the next 12 to 18 months? And I never ask them to actually do it because it would be an awfully embarrassing experience. But my point is that when we walk out of the room today, we're going to be able to do that. Because unless I know what's important to you, I'm going to talk about what's important to me. And some of that might be important to you, but most of it won't be. So all I'm going to end up doing in that scenario is wasting a whole bunch of your time and my time. So understanding who your customer is, whether it is an actual customer outside the organization, an executive leadership team, it's really all about discovery, alignment, and prioritization. And that is the key for any sort of digital efforts that I've ever seen be successful.
John, do you have anything to add on that front, on how to build sort of like this bottom-up approach?
I think what Robert was saying, I completely agree with the listening. I mean, that's just unbelievable. The bottom-up approach, first from whether it be top-down or bottom-up, listening is the most important thing. So yeah, 100%, Robert, that's unbelievable. When it comes to bottom-up approach for the digital transformation, it's tough because you got to have a balance of what the pain points that a customer is feeling and who you're talking to. If you talk to the captain of the boat, of the battleship, he's going to say something completely different than if you talk to I'm picturing like those old coal ships or something in there where the guy's just shoveling the coal into the engine. If you ask him how's it going, he's like, it's hot and it's horrible. Well, he's always going to say it's hot and it's horrible down here, right? Because that's where he is. And the guy on the top's going to be going, that's pretty good. We're driving real fine. So, I mean, you gotta, when you're going in and trying to consult with them, again, as Robert said, you got to listen, but you got to also remember who you're listening to. Like their pain points are going to look very different sometimes. And when you talk to an organization, sometimes they don't have their act together, ours included, so you have to look at them and say, well, who am I talking to and why are they seeing that pain point? And is that going to give you the most value for it, right? So it's very different, but who you talk to.
Yeah, definitely. So another question, and probably you both can speak to this, is that can we talk a bit more about bringing innovation through M&A? What are the pitfalls? What is the critical to making it work? And I think, John, you have mentioned in your presentation. Also, can M&A be efficient in building customer knowledge, again, for example, through acquiring companies with better customer data VOC process?
You want to take that one, John? You want me to give it a shot? What do you want to do?
Go for it. You're speaking. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, so first of all, Julia, thanks for the question. We've made, I'm sure, as I know Cisco has too, a lot of acquisitions over the years. Some have gone really well. Some have been challenging. What we've adopted is sort of a strategy internally of a team approach. So when we think about acquiring a company, we recognize the cultural impact. These people didn't apply for a job at Salesforce. They just simply found themselves working at Salesforce on a Monday versus the company they were working at on Friday. So we really do take sort of a thoughtful sort of onboarding approach, a cultural onboarding. They get put through basically a new hire journey, even though they're basically an acquisition. The second one is around the technology. So there's another team that is focused in on the technology integration of whether it's a platform, it depends. If it's natively built on our platform already, that's pretty easy. If it's something like Tableau that we recently acquired that lives both in the cloud and on premise and has a large install base of customers, there's a lot of, how do you get those two technology strategies to merge effectively together? The final one that's most interesting is sort of the better together model and a go-to-market strategy. So how do we define and communicate why we bought this company? Not just externally, but also equally important internally, so that people understand why this combined value proposition is a 1 + 1 = 3, not a 1 + 1 = I'm not sure. And so it's really sort of a three-pronged approach that we take that involves the culture, the technology, and then maximizing the go-to-market strategy or the go-to-market opportunity, the reason we bought this company in the first place. The last one is interesting because that's where you get, convincing someone who has made their career at a company like Tableau is suddenly part of a larger solution. It's an interesting thing to bring them on board in that. It's almost like it's a lot of challenge for us. I think that we've really focused in on doing it. And so if you want to have a lot of the sessions that we do in a briefing center, the innovation center that I work within, we do a lot of talk around acquisitions, and it's basically sort of walking through a more detailed process behind those 3 processes. So, if that's something that you all would like to discuss in more detail, happy to schedule some time with you guys to do that. But that's a high level overview.
Awesome. John,
Oh,
I know.
the last one. Sorry. I just want to say the one thing around data, data is everything. And I just want to kind of lay that out, that the Salesforce is a data company, right? Cisco is a data company. Every company is a data company, and the goal of an acquisition or a data strategy, and it's not the most politically correct term, and I apologize for that, but how do we weaponize data? That is probably the big initiative that most of our customers are thinking about. How do I use data as a strategic advantage, not to necessarily help me sell better or service better, but to be more competitive, to be faster, right? To be a better company. And so that's the last thing on data. I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, no, actually, I've been working a lot on the quantitative finance, right? And quantitative finance is sort of like exactly this, right? Is that how do you create the systematic advantage by using qualitative and quantitative data, right? And I think that people sort of a little bit missing that systematic advantage part, right? Is that, and again, sometimes it's just because, people on top does not really understand what data can do, right? And sometimes, John, to your example, maybe a person who's down there, shoveling the coal, have the great idea of what data could be used to improve, the speed, the accuracy of the ship, but maybe that captain on top is not connected, to that and not really understanding. So John, I know that Cisco has a very interesting approach to the M&A process. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah. I think I'd echo everything that Robert said. I think the difference for Cisco is, we've been famously acquisition hungry. We've done something like 200. I think we're pushing 210 acquisitions since the company was formed. I think the thing that happened, I'd like to say it was on purpose for the company all the way through, but our culture when we do an acquisition is that we do not bring in companies and then say, okay, well now become part of the company. And here you get our label and you bring it in. It disrupts something that we've done. Whatever company comes in takes over, and whatever we were doing in that area pretty much gets canceled, right? So we bring it because we recognize that if we are buying something, it's something that we were not doing, and that somebody else was doing it, and we bring it in and we cancel what was going on. I can't tell you how many times we've been head-to-head competing with somebody, and then we go and buy it in, and the company and the team that was on there was like, hey, fold in with this person you were competing with or go. That's really what was happening. So they replace what's going on. I think that's the unique thing if you want to take a look at the whole M&A strategies of different companies. If you, some of the, I don't want to say the other company names, but a lot of them are like, hey, bring them in and then we'll put our logo on top of it, and make that part of our company. It's like, no, actually we need to disrupt ourselves for that. So that's a little, the only difference that I could add. All the things that Robert was talking about are, I'd echo them, but that's the difference that we go there. And then Cisco too, when we're looking to acquire, we're also looking to acquire market share. As everybody is, we're not just acquiring the technology, we're acquiring the market share. And we've had some things that have famously failed. The Flip acquisition many years ago, when we said, okay, we were going to go and buy we were going to start to get into what actually now is on everybody's phone, which is taking videos and stuff. But there are other reasons why we buy things like that. Like we bought that company, they had an interesting video codec, and that video codec really, really helps us in online meetings and things like that, and WebEx and things like that. So there are other reasons. Sometimes it's not obvious from when you're reading from the outside why you purchase a company, right? You buy something, you think, well, why are they buying that? Well, we're disrupting a technology that we needed for that. It might not exactly be what the company was doing. Yeah. But I'd say the best thing is that we disrupt ourselves when we do the acquisition. Also, the other thing that's unique about Cisco is well, I don't know if it's unique, but it's important to Cisco. It's probably not unique. Is that the integration team has a seat at the table for the M&A, right? And that's very important, because if they turn around and say, look, I can't integrate this company, it's not a cultural fit. Like when we did our Meraki acquisition, we kept Meraki pretty much separate, right? Then we didn't fold in. We were like, well, hold on, that's a whole different thing that we're doing that needed more time and incubation to marry into a product line. It wasn't going to just come and bang replace. We were like, we needed to, if you will, I'll kill analogies here, but you kind of had to put the fish in the fish tank in the bag for a while before you were going to let it out. It wasn't like, hey, just drop it in the tank and let it go, right? So we had to like sit it in there a little bit and then let it go. And that was something that the integration team looked at it right away and went, you're not dumping that right in the fish tank. That's gonna mess up the fish tank.
No, yeah, yeah.
So that's important, because you could really screw that up, The other thing about Cisco is, like, we bought App Dynamics, we bought AppD, and literally on a Wednesday. On a Wednesday before, App Dynamics is going to go public on a Monday, and the Wednesday before we said buy it, and it's like, I mean, come on, you can't close a house sometimes in that team. So the team is really, really stellar in that. So there's having a good team counts, and the integration team is important, and then I'd say disrupting, if I could say those three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. You know what? Anytime one of these calls leads to another analogy, fish in the bag, I like that one.
Quote me on that one.
No, as a previous investment banker, I'm pretty sure that the team who was doing IPO was happy that the IPO is actually not happening. No, but it's actually interesting, and like talking about the recent developments. I think that with the raise right now in the Silicon Valley and in the United States in general, SPAC, right, special purpose acquisition companies are on the rise, and they sort of have this like fish in the tank approach, right? Those are the companies that are raising the public money to acquire private companies and kind of keep them in the portfolio, right? So sometimes some of those M&As could be considered just not necessarily the strategic acquisition, but also the financial acquisition as well. So maybe sometimes, again, keeping those companies separate can be a benefit just within itself before you sort of bring them into your operational cycle.
Yeah. I like this question about data. By the way, the one that was just asked.
Yes. So let me voice it, and then I'll let you answer it. So data is important today and in the future, but there are restrictions on data collection, the integrity of data. How do you see the future with all of those regulations coming on board?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't restriction; it was resistance. Right. I think that it's all good. It's all good. I think the difference for me is just, most companies have been collecting data about their customers for a long time and have done absolutely nothing with it. Right. And whether it is a financial services company or an insurance company or a healthcare provider or something, and then somebody comes along and totally changes the game. Right. So this is kind of an interesting one. So Amazon, for me, I do not consider myself a customer. I consider myself a victim of that company, because what they have done to me is taking the data they have about me and put it to work to make me a better Amazon customer by suggesting things I might be interested in and random stuff that is so, to be fair, like 85% of the stuff they recommend to me, I'm like, what is that? But the 15% that they nail, I'm like, that was really good. Like, that was really smart. There are some issues with trust. I think that is the big resistance is companies generally have not delivered on a data-driven customer experience, but they continue to ask their customers to share more data with them, but the customers doesn't see anything in results, or in response to that. So I think the real focus for customers is like, I am willing to give you data if I get something back. The same way that a salesperson is willing to give data to their marketing department if they get something back. And so this data trust building, data relationship, I think is where you see the resistance, because the value of giving data hasn't been recognized. Right? But the opportunity is enormous, because when you think about something like financial services, for example, financial products are a commodity, but a data-driven financial experience isn't. And so companies are really starting to realize that if they leverage data in a trusted, customer-centric way, it has a really, real powerful, and all of a sudden when you start doing that, the resistance starts going down and down and down and down. But it is about building trust with a customer base or with an internal group of stakeholders, such as employees, right? Or salespeople or marketing people or service professionals. It's really all about trust.
So I have a follow-on question. I know this is not a data forum per se, but because you are, you spoke very intelligently on that. So I know you kind of lean toward that particular thought process of how do we deliver the value of the data that we are collecting, right? So as a customer, I know just an example, as an Amazon user also, how do I know really my data is returning me good value as a customer? How do we interpret that? How do we analyze that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it for me is their ability to make, and I think Amazon sort of coined this term, next best offer, right? So how can I use the data about my customer to be more predictive for the experiences that are coming down the road? And so a lot of, maybe the analogy is like if you had a turn-by-turn navigation system in your car that was always 3 blocks behind, right? Telling you that you should have done something 3 blocks ago is a lot less valuable than telling you that you should make a right-hand turn in 3 blocks. And I think that it is possible for companies to adapt and create those customer journeys that are predictive, because it's obviously not the first time they've had a customer. And there's obviously some commonalities between, that's kind of where like AI and intelligent workflow for me kind of collide in a weird sort of way, because thinking about, artificial intelligence is literally in my small, tiny brain, if A and B, then C is a predictable next step. And so the more companies that use that ability to collect and not just collect data, but orchestrate it so it's usable. A lot of companies have a lot of data. In fact, I've never met a customer that had too little data. Every single one of them has way too much and they can't use most of it. So most of it's useless to them. So the whole strategy has to be built on top of a cohesive and coherent data strategy. How are we going to organize and use this data in a trusted way that's going to create value for our customers? Again, kind of going back to how do you prioritize? It has to be around the value that you deliver to the customer.
Yeah, and I also want to add that in a lot of times, and John, I will let you weigh in on that as well, is that a lot of times that even like internal data is not properly shared. So in financial services in Wells Fargo did something like 55 acquisitions in the last 20 years, and in all the geographical regions, I had like 25 systems that were booking loans on the same customers, on the different geographic regions. Moreover, there was like 3 credit agency feeds done, the legacy feeds that are coming in. So a lot of times that the data that actually you have on the customer is just not shared within the company, right? And then let's say if we take the healthcare example, maybe the data, let's say that you collect something from the customer, right? And you give it to the one doctor, but then this data does not go forward to the pharmacy department, does not go forward to the other customers, or to the other doctors, right? So even this, I see it a lot of times that you do collect this data. Maybe you prove a little bit of the experience in one part of the organization, but you don't share it with, in case of the healthcare, you don't share with other doctors, you don't share with the pharmaceutical, maybe you not share with some of the, some other teams, right? So how do you actually create the data strategy within your organization? That way the customers can actually see the benefit is that when this data collected once and then shared across with some additional data coming in, maybe you give them the variable, and then for one treatment, this data could be shared, right? That let's say your pulse and your pressure, anything like that. The data can be shared not with your physician in general, but it can be available for the other specialists in your organization. So, John, what do you think of that? How do you think is like the data sort of, again, all the limitations, all the regulations, restrictions, people don't want to share data. How do you do this? How do you weaponize the data both ways, both for the customer and for the company?
Well, I'll answer how you I don't know if I knew how to weaponize all the data, I'd be working for myself. But the interesting thing I was thinking while everyone was talking is also in the questions that were coming about healthcare. It has to do with the implied, the age, I haven't thought this out, but I'm saying this for the first time here, is the experience that you've had with handling data, especially with healthcare. So like at Cisco and healthcare, our visceral reaction to sharing data is, whoa, no. You don't share it, let alone look at it. Like, holy cow, they'll shut. Like, if I wanted to, I don't inspect the packets that are going through and count them and see what's going on. That's we let them pass through. That's the implicit arrangement that we've had. And if you talk to somebody in healthcare, you say, I don't share that data with anyone. It's private. It's private. So the idea of like grabbing it together and putting it together, it's viscerally no in those industries. Like, you don't do that, right? Whereas in younger companies or something, or companies that are coming out, like, you know, it's always like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, they get access to information. They're like, woohoo. I mean, I remember when the first job I ever had, I got HR, I was doing an HR one, and I got access to everybody's salary information. I was like, woohoo. And I went through and I looked, and the CEO's making this much and this guy's making that much. Once you have access to the information, you're like, I got my hands on it. And I didn't realize that I wasn't allowed to. I shouldn't have been doing that, right? And I should have been summarizing it and doing all these things to it. But once you have access to it, you're like, ooh, I can use it. And then there are some industries that are like, well, no, there's some privacy information. So if we haven't seen the changes in healthcare, one of the questions that are coming in, it's because that health sector is like, it's in the culture of like, no, don't share the information. In fact, that's been the default all the time. So it's going to take a long time to get to that. Whereas like in Amazon, it's like, oh, you didn't want me to share your information? You didn't like tell me that like that was bad because I have already sent it to everybody I knew, right? So like it's the complete opposite of it. So it comes down to I don't know where my point on this thing is really that when you're looking at the data, it comes to the history of how you've been handling that data. And some people are saying no, and other people are saying, yeah, of course, you know, and there are companies in the middle that are like, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't, you know, and that's that balance.
Let me, hey, can I give Aisha 2 seconds on some healthcare examples of what I mean by
Of course,
data?
please.
All right, so we work a lot. We just had a call last week with a medical device provider that does basically a stick-on defibrillator. So it's basically an external defibrillator that you wear. And this device, like any device, generates a lot of data. However, their strategy did not include sharing that data with stakeholders. So what I mean by that is their strategy says, well, what happens is when you wear this thing for a week, when you go in and check in with the doctor, they can download your heart, you know, performance over the last week, which is valuable, but not necessarily timely if you have a heart issue in the 3 days in the middle of that week. And so the concept of sharing that data more in real time, sort of event-based monitoring of a heart, you know, anyway, was really interesting. And so the doctor was one audience, but then we started to take it to the next level. And they said, you know, the typical profile of a heart patient with a defibrillator is generally an elderly person. And elderly persons generally have kids. And so how are you going to make that information available and timely to the kids? Because they are the ones that are, you know, have the most concern and are likely the ones to drive, you know, outcomes or drive action to drive the right outcomes. And so it was really about how, you know, the collection of the data is the first step. The sharing of that data is the next step. And for a lot of organizations, especially CIOs that we deal with, you know, if you talk to them 7 or 8 years ago, they would basically say that my job as CIO is to protect the data of my organization from everybody in my organization, right? Because I don't want people looking at people's salaries, not to pick on you, but I don't want that data. You know, I need that data to be clean, and I don't want anybody to see that data. And now all of a sudden, the role of a CIO is to push data out to the edges, so that decisions are not made at the center of the universe, but are made at the very edges of the universe by a family member, by a patient, by a physician. And the faster that data gets in the right hands of the right people in the right contacts, the more capable you are of driving better outcomes. That's a very high level sort of example that we run into recently.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I'll reserve one more example that we're doing with one of the pharma companies in the Latin America. But just the last question, sort of like out of the respect of your gentleman time, is that, John, I'll start with you. What do you think is one key mistake organizations make when executing digital transformation? What would be your top one, or maybe I don't know, top two, if it's hard, if it's hard for you to pick.
Because I kind of know what Robert's going to say, so I don't want to say the same thing.
Say it. It's okay. I'll just agree with you. It's fine.
Well, Robert, I won't. The change for the sake of change, right? Asking the question why is the big thing. We need to do. Robert was talking about key. We get a lot of people. I need to go. I need to digitally transform my company, and it's like we come in and they're like, and how do we do that, Cisco? And we're like, well, the first question is like, why do you want to do that? And then what do you want to do, right? Like, hold on, So change for the sake of change is not beneficial. Like, you have to have a purpose behind it. And there's always, and for us at Cisco internally too, we always tie things back to purpose. What's the purpose of the company? What's the purpose of the company? Does this fit with us, and why are we doing something? So asking the question, like, why you want to do it is the most important and the key mistake if you don't know why. Yeah.
Rob, off to you. You're on mute.
It is the same. It's basically the same thing. Like,
I know, yeah.
A digital transformation that's not relevant is irrelevant, right? And so unless you are relevant to the business, unless your digital transformation has ties back to the top line revenue, bottom line revenue, share of customer wallets, customer retention numbers, like, if you can't explain to people why they should care, nobody will. And so the big point for me is, it's digital transformation is about improving the way a business runs, defining how you're going to do that, and how you're going to measure whether or not you're successful. If you don't have that, you're just a flash in the pan, fun little experiment that nobody cares about.
Yeah, I do agree. Actually, I started my session today with saying that the real transformation comes from the processes and not necessarily the technology, right? So if you understand the processes, if you understand how this will help your company and how your process will be improved and how it's going to affect the company in general, that's pretty much where it all starts.
Yeah,
I think maybe.
Oh, go ahead.
I think maybe everybody should take it to note that Robert and I didn't speak before this, and we didn't jump on it, but we both have this. We both came in here with exactly the same thing, which was, you got to know why you're doing these things.
Yeah.
And I put down in my notes in here, you have to have the purpose for your digital transformation. And Robert was saying, well, he asked the question why, and look, we're both saying exactly the same thing. We must have seen tons and tons of customers coming in, both of us. Yeah. And that's the same thing that we're seeing is you have to do it that way, right? Why do you want to do it?
Yeah, I do have a question relative to your statement there, which I do not disagree with. However, the audience that you're talking to at times is an organization, and let's use the age-old Uber example. A New York taxi cab driver in 2016 never thought he had a problem. He was fine doing what he's doing. Spent $700,000 on a medallion and was making a living. The car owner was making a return on their investment, and everything's great. And then all of a sudden a mobile app shows up and basically devalues that entire ecosystem. So many times you're talking to an organization about things that are good for them when they think everything's just fine. So culturally, I agree with what you're saying, but culturally, how do you approach that? Who's going to care when actually many of your audience doesn't care because they feel just fine, not realizing that terror is around the corner.
Yeah. I mean, sporting your $700,000 medallion is a big confidence builder. And it's always that in our world, it's what this pandemic has taught a lot of the customers that I deal with is that, resiliency is about agility. I remember those conversations with taxi cabs in San Francisco. Their response was to sue Uber and make sure they couldn't pick up people at the airport or ban them from certain neighborhoods. And it was like this trying to defend the status quo is never a good strategy, because companies have to, the writing was on the wall so early And those companies, those taxi cab companies probably had an opportunity. They had the networks, they had the drivers, they had the cars, they had everything that they did. If they had spent more of their time just trying to adapt versus defend, they would have probably been a totally different scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great
So,
example.
the best defense is more offense.
Oh,
100%.
yeah, and also on that, right? I think a slight benefit that we do actually have examples of Uber, and we have examples of Airbnb, and we have examples of Amazon where you can actually drive fear, right? Is that I have some retail customers that I'm working with. I'm like, so what are you doing to actively compete with Amazon? I know they're not in your geographic regions, but they have more cash than you. They have more technology than you. They have more everything than you. Do you think they're not going to come and like decimate everything? They already did it before. Uber did it before. Airbnb did it before. You know, Amazon, Google's like Google and Facebook decimated the advertisement everywhere else, right? So you can use those fear. I always say like, be fearful in your business, like be afraid. This is how we survive as a species, right? That's in the real life. Yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that was a good point. It was really good. That was a really good last question. So I think, of course, there are companies in there that are just trying to change and like, how do I change it and how do I stay competitive? I think maybe the point I would think of is, in order to stay resilient in the face of change, you've got to exercise that. You've got to exercise, right? So you've got to be in shape, which means you have to constantly be trying to disrupt yourselves before you're disruptive. And clearly, the taxi cab companies did not do that. The cab companies were like, forget it, I'm not going to. So if you're not exercising it, if you're not exercising the resiliency, you won't be resilient, and then you will get disrupted on that. So maybe that's the other counterpoint to somebody who's saying, hey, I want to change for the sake of change, figure out why. And then the second point would be, hey, you better exercise that muscle all the time. We're doing it all the time for ourselves because we're going to get disrupted constantly. So that's why we have the challenges. That's why we look for big, bold bets. That's why we do our M&A stuff. That's us exercising to make sure that we don't get disrupted as well.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Just being cautious of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Always a pleasure of having you. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you soon too. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right.